Welcome to the Decentralized Mind podcast. I'm your host, Emmanuela, and today I have with me Dean Hall, who was a therapist and still is a therapist, but ended up fixing his cancers with nature. And he wrote a book called The Wild Cure, which is a really great read. So thank you so much for coming on here, Dean.
Oh, Emmanuel, I've been looking forward to this, and we've been talking back and forth for a couple of months now or longer. And I just appreciate all that you're doing and what your mission and message is. So I was really looking forward to being here.
Awesome. You know what? I did a lot of research on the podcast that you've done that I could find. And I must say, I did not dig up that many. Um, and I wanted to take a different angle because when I was reading your book, first of all, I want to say that everyone should read your book because it's such an easy read. It, just took me a couple hours max. And the story draws you in a very the way that's the conversational, the way the book is, and you really feel the emotion of your story, which I think was really nicely done. And a lot of podcasts that I've heard you on, at least, were talking about your physical journey on, the leukemia and the lymphoma and everything that you did. And I want to do something fresh because I wanted to kind of talk about the grief aspect of it. I actually started this podcast in honor of a loss that I had because I made very different choices in death in that situation than most other people have. And it was a loss of my horse, which for me was a really big deal.
It would be.
The reason why it's called the decentralized mind is because it has to do with how situations in our life, and in my case, changed the way I think. And when you, given your background that you talk about in other podcasts, like you ate junk food, you were, knew nothing about really health or how any of this worked, I almost see it as like you resisted the traditional path. And it was almost like the hand of God, because based on everything else, based on what you said about your parents, how they are, white coat worshipers, you said this in podcasts before, you went the other way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was it was basically just, I just don't want to do it. You didn't actually have a deep kind of intuitive, can you maybe describe that a little bit more?
Well, maybe I overstated it. I mean, I had been a triathlete for 20 years, and you can't optimize your scores and your performance without, paying some attention to nutrition. But you got to remember, I'm so old, Emmanuela, that I was raised in the 60s. And I mean, we didn't have much back then, and we didn't have much in the way of media or education either on nutrition. And so we just believed what we heard on commercials. And, so we ate white toast and heavily processed meats. And most of us kids lived on hot dogs, which now just makes me cringe. And so, yeah. And plus, at the time I got sick, I was living in the Midwest. And, I love the people there, but it's kind of what I call a food desert. It's really hard to get, in most places, organic greens and fruits and berries back there, and especially ones that are fresh. Nowadays, it's probably easier than it was in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But back then, I remember the first year or two, I was raised on salmon out here. And for the first 5 years I was out there, you couldn't hardly even get frozen salmon out there, much less fresh salmon. So, yeah, it was really a change for me. I wasn't as resistant, as it just wasn't as important to my lifestyle at that time. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you lost your wife,
Right.
and because you're in your story and a lot of the things And I know you mentioned in another podcast that some of the stuff is not in your book because it was just too much.
Yeah.
A lot
We
of
did
things
some
happened to
beta
you.
tests, and people said I couldn't get through the first couple chapters because it was just so horrible. And that's not what we wanted. And it was
Yeah.
horrible,
Yeah.
but you gotta keep them with you, you know? So
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure if I got the timeline right, but did all of your, diagnosed health problems begin after her death or before?
no. They started 3 years before in 2006. 3 days before Christmas, I was diagnosed with leukemia. And it was really scary at first because I had features of both acute and chronic. And my doctor had never seen that. And he was so well known and so brilliant. He was on the KU board of medicine. And so he sent it out to 3 world class neurosurgeons, or I'm sorry, oncologists, and they'd never seen it. And so at first, if my blood work hadn't changed and I was zooming up in the 20s and 30s thousands every 2 or 3 days in white blood cell counts, which is just a terrible thing, an avalanche almost of illness and toxicity. And so they only gave me 4 to 6 weeks if things didn't change. Thankfully, they settled down and went to chronic, which bought me some time, but it was really bad. My immune system was so suppressed all of 2007 that I had a hard time even getting out of bed a lot of times. My doctor called it mono on crack because it just feels like you're wearing a lead suit all the time. It's just so hard to walk. And so yeah, the 2007 was bad. 2008 was the first time I woke up in a hospital not knowing how I'd gotten there, and the nurse looking at me saying, "Oh, we didn't think you were going to make it. You're awake." I'm like, "What?" Yeah. So and that's happened in my life 3 times. So yeah, that was the first. But I made all sorts of lifestyle changes. One of them was I
Hmm.
really cleaned up my diet, started trying to do my best to get at least 9 hours of sleep a night.
So
So
you were saying that, you were sick for 3 years before your first wife
yeah,
died, right?
right. And I made
Okay.
all of the adjustments that you would make. They wanted to do chemo and radiation at 2 different points, and I said I'd had so many cancer patients in my therapy practice. And then my father had cancer as well. And so I watched all these people go through traditional care. And then what really helped me out is I had been the therapist for several physicians. And my generation and the generations before me were raised with the idea that doctors are gods of the universe. It's what I call the white coat syndrome. If somebody wears a white lab coat, they're automatically smarter than you, and you better do exactly what they say. I suffered from that too. I thought, okay, I bow to you until I had probably 8 or so different forms of doctors, highly respected, very brilliant, in my office in therapy. And boy, the mystique wore off quickly when I started listening to what some of these people, how they thought, how they treated their spouses or children. It changed the way I looked at doctors. And of course, one size doesn't fit all, but what I'm saying is it broke that image. I just saw them as people. And so it made it easier for me to be a good advocate for myself. And so for each one of my oncologists, I would go in and say, "Hey, I mean no disrespect, but I own my body. You don't. So I've got to be the boss of my body. You're going to be my expert consultant. I'm going to listen to everything you say, and I'm going to ask questions. Not that I'm questioning you, but I'm asking for more information. Please don't take it as disrespectful." And 2 immediately fired me. Their egos couldn't handle that approach. It's, no, you got to do exactly what I say, how I say it, when I say it. I'm like, it's not the way it's going to work, because if I die, you won't even remember me. But I hope my family will. My life matters to me. And, but anyway, so I looking back, that experience as being a therapist put me in a real good position to advocate for myself. Because when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's so scary. And we've got this mystique that it's an automatic death sentence. And then you go in and they tell you what you have to do immediately while you're still in a state of shock and kind of confused. You're kind of easy prey. And thankfully, I didn't go in that way, even though I was scared to death. And I would tell each one of them, the way I look at chemo and radiation is it's the atomic bomb. And you don't drop the bomb in the first battle. You wait till you got no other choices. And several of them, it made two of them mad. But the one I finally ended up with, he cocked his head and he's like, wow, never thought about it like that, but that makes sense. Let's treat it that way. And so that's what we did. Yeah. And I got better. The chronic leukemia, all the numbers went in the right direction finally by about mid 2008. And 2009 and 10 were pretty wonderful. We thought we'd learned the lessons we needed to as far as lifestyle and my heavy stress. Because I was working around the clock and I was specializing in, had for the last 10 years, sexual trauma, not knowing how much secondhand trauma I was getting. And then before that, I had been considered a grief expert. Here's the ironic thing, Emmanuel. I'd been considered a grief expert in the Midwest. I'd led seminars, written several articles. And then when my wife died, I was lost. I realized I had known nothing, experientially anyway.
In theory, what did being a grief expert actually mean versus practicality?
Yeah. It was really difficult for me because arrogantly, unknowingly, I call it a hidden pocket of pride. I would listen to these people, try my best to put themselves in this situation, and even unknowingly think, yeah, I probably would have done it better. But when it happened to me, Mary and I had been together since I was 19. I mean, we practically, it felt like, grew up together. I was so young when I got married to her, as was the case for most of my generation. I was only 21. I tell everybody I was 21 going on 12. And then we moved to her little town. And at the time, I didn't realize how, coming from Oregon, being displaced, living in this small rural Kansas town of 12,000, 4 miles from the Oklahoma border, deep in the heart of redneckery, how it formed my whole adult identity. Because people in that town, if your grandparents didn't grow up there, you were an outsider. And if you were from the West Coast, oh, God forbid, you were really a strange bird. And so for the first 2 years, it bothered me because when people would meet me, oh, there's Mary's husband. And I'd be like, yeah, my name's Dean. Oh, hi, Mary's husband. They'd never call me by name. And after a couple of years, I got used to it. But for 30 years, people still, 30 years later, were calling me Mary's husband. Okay, and that was fine because it was a good gig. But I hadn't realized how unconsciously that had formed my whole adult identity. And so when she was gone, I was there in her little town. And people were still, oh, there's Mary's husband. And I'd always say under my breath, but I'm not anymore. I wish I was. It was just really hard. And it doesn't mean that my grief was any harder than anyone else's. It's just, I knew so much about grief and had worked with it so much, I thought I'd do well. And I was so entirely human and flawed and messy with it that I was not only feeling the normal human experience, but I had a lot of shame around it as well because of the arrogance I'd had, but also I knew what would be healthy and I couldn't get myself to do those things. And so, I mean, it got so bad, Emmanuela, that 3 or 4 times I called up old clients and apologized. I'm like, hey, I know I helped you. I don't know if you've heard, but I'm going through it now myself. And I just don't think I did a good enough job. And they're like, no, Dean, you did fine. But it was just beyond anything I would have imagined. Yeah.
Do you think that that identity loss, if you want to call it that, from all those years and being young there added to the weight of everything?
Oh, certainly. As a matter of fact, they're now finding for most forms of cancers, particularly blood cancers, 1 year, give or take a month or so, after a tragic or traumatic event is when the person's diagnosed. And for
Mm.
me, 1 year, nearly to the day of Mary dying, the leukemia came back and brought with it a very aggressive lymphoma. And so, yeah, I think it added a lot of weight. I don't want to continue my arrogance, though. I don't think I had it any harder than anybody else as far as the grief. But the grief really clouded the one thing I've always had that I felt was my strength, and that was my clarity and my intellect. Uh, my wife was pretty funny. And she said, one of God's greatest gifts to you is you're a lot smarter than you look. And so that's always kind of been my secret weapon. People don't expect me to be very smart, but I am. But boy, I wasn't then. I had helped so many people go through it. I knew that the shock and the torment, especially of acute grief, really muddles your brain. It's not unusual for people. And I just would tell them this, especially if they'd been readers. You're not going to be able to read for a while. Your brain's going to skip. And I can't even remember learning to read. Mom says I was reading by about 2.5. Nobody ever really taught me. I had a big brother and he was doing it. So I thought, man, if he can do it, I can do it. And so, but for the first time, I really couldn't read because my mind would wander after a couple sentences. And so I just was really lost. I'd lost so many pieces of my identity, but then not to be able to use my brain and not to be able to read, those were real hardcore quiet. Because in the Midwest, if you're too smart a guy or a big reader, you lose your man card. And so those were kind of closet strengths, but they were deeply embedded into my identity and they were gone as well.
Nowadays, with this whole, what I call like the nervous system crowd,
Right.
it's become very popular to attribute illnesses to trauma or grief.
Right.
And, as somebody who has studied a lot of Dr. Jack Bruce's work
Good.
and everything he's been writing recently about grief and what he calls the XYZ axes and how, it changes your blood-brain barrier and the vortexes. But it's not the grief itself.
Right.
It's the way I've begun to see it is that grief takes a big magnifying glass onto the problems in your body, in your environment, and just makes them more prevalent or more highlighted. Probably an event for you that was many years in the making,
Oh, certainly.
as we understand cancer today, then you hit the last straw on the camel's back with the loss after you'd already struggled for 3 years, really.
Right. Right.
And kind of come out of it a bit.
Right.
You talked about having this huge weight on your chest as grief and also the weight of the exhaustion when you were first diagnosed. How much of that weight disappeared when you got better? And do you think it got even more intense after her death?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't really, I felt stress my entire life. I was on one of the Nike's first sponsored athletic teams, an Olympic development team. And so I always felt that performance stress. I wanted to be an Olympian. Then I wanted to blitz through. I was so eager to learn and having so much fun in college that I wanted not one, but several degrees. And so I just took everything. But I was always a little overeager. I was always taking about 18 hours plus trying to have fun. And developed this real kind of crazy habit of I never studied until 1 a.m. And then I'd study from 1 a.m. to 3 a.m., write my papers then, go back to bed. So it never took any of my time. So I had real dysregulate, but I pretty much had dysregulated sleep my whole life. I think if they would have had ADHD when I was a kid, I'd have been heavily medicated. So I'm glad they didn't have it because I learned ways of coping. And that was my little ADHD way of doing my studies because everything was quiet and I was somewhat half asleep so my brain could actually focus. And it worked well, but not long term for my body. And I'd
Yeah.
had two jobs from the time I was 15 to the time I was 42. So I'd always been hard charging. And again, man, I'm making myself sound like an egotistical asshole, but I don't think I was. But I kind of now look back at it and I really thought normal human rules didn't apply to me. Maybe that's just immaturity. But, everybody was always so tired. I never was. Everybody would get sick. I hardly ever did. The one thing I knew is I could outlast. The reason I loved soccer and endurance events is people get tired, and I always knew I could outlast any of them. I wasn't as talented as them. I wasn't as good at ball handling skills on the pitch and that sort of thing, but I could outlast them. And that always helped me be successful. And then life for me really turned on its head when all of a sudden my brain and my body weren't working. Life had more to teach me. I think it was more than just a lesson in humility, but the lesson in humility was pretty severe. Yeah.
Do you think that your ability to outlast them was connected to the amount of, you talked about, hiking the tallest mountain as a kid, swimming across the lakes, like obviously very nature-based lifestyle as a kid. Do you think that was a contributing
Oh,
factor to?
certainly. Absolutely. My family, my dad climbed all the mountains on the West Coast. Oregon's tallest mountain, he climbed when he was 9. So he thought that needed to be a legacy thing. And so he made sure I climbed it when I was 9. My mom,
How many hours?
uh,
How many hours was the climb?
well, for that kind of climb in the Cascades, since it's snow and ice, especially if you're not a speed climber, you want to start at about 10 or 11 a.m. so that you're climbing through the night and you summit early morning before things start falling, or the ice gets
Oh,
too
so it's
mushy.
actually like more than a day.
No, no, we did it. We did it. It took us probably, we started at 10:30, got there at about 6 or 7, and then stayed up on top for about an hour and got down in probably about 3 hours or 4 hours.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, it wasn't about speed, but just to be 9 years old when all my other buddies are getting tucked in with some hot cocoa and a story from mommy, and I'm climbing through the night this marathon event with my mother doing it because she was first generation Swede and her parents were berry and dairy farmers. And she too really prized endurance. Her mom, my grandma, would get up an hour before sunrise, make breakfast for everyone. Everybody had, as soon as the sun came above the horizon, everybody had to be out in the fields work till noon, and then we only got half an hour to an hour off, and then we had to work till sunset. And the person that could do it and acted like it wasn't a big deal was, the most valuable. And so I was always trying to act like, even though I was exhausted, it was no big deal. So it was this real subtle family script from both sides. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So I came by
Yeah.
it, looking
No, I
back
asked
at it
about
now, I came
the
by it naturally.
right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I asked about the time because I wanted to understand like how tall is the like how
Oh,
long
yeah.
is the trail. I
Yeah.
grew up
Oh,
hiking
did you?
and camping, and we did like I've probably been hiking since I was like 6 or 7, and I was older than you. I was, I think, 11, and my sister bribed me up to climb one of the Adirondack
Oh,
mountains with a chocolate bar, and she was the one. She would make fun of me and everything when I was like crying. It was shorter hike. It was like a 6 hour hike,
yeah.
like 4.5 hours up, right? Less than 3 hours down. But
But you
she
got
was
to
like, "Come
remember,
on,
this
come
was not a
on."
hike. Different between the
It
Adirondacks
was
and the
a
Cascades.
climb,
This is snow and ice. You're using crampons,
right?
ice axes, and you're roping up and
Oh, so
going.
you're
And
roping.
yeah, and yeah, it's pretty much just a real hard snow and ice hike where you have to do after the first. It's pretty pedestrian the first couple hours, but once you get past the ski lifts, which now they go way up, but in the day they didn't. You have to do what's called kicking steps, and so the leader will
Mm,
kick a couple times, kick a step in the snow and ice so you don't slide, and then you follow those steps. So it's like a stair climb in when you're freezing your butt off for about 9 or 10 hours if you're an average person. There are people that have made it up in 2, but they're crazy athletic people. I certainly wasn't that at 9. And then the last little pitch, you're going nearly vertical. So you have an ice
okay,
axe. And so it's a little more harrowing than just your typical hike. Um,
it's like an ice rock
it's
climb, not
climbing.
a
Yeah,
true.
it's
Right,
alpine
I got it.
climbing. Every time you said hike, I flinched a little bit and tried not to say anything because I've done a lot
I
of
didn't
hiking too. I love to
understand, like,
hike, but
you
it's
know?
much more challenging than your typical
Yeah.
hike. Yeah, yeah,
I got it. I
yeah,
got it. No, when I read it, because people say climbing a mountain
yeah,
as in they're walking up
yeah,
the
yeah,
mountain. So never in my mind that I realized, like I've never been to Oregon,
yeah,
right? That
yeah.
you're like literally rock climbing
Well,
on ice,
alpine
basically.
climbing is different than rock climbing. Rock climbing's usually severely vertical and you're bouldering, you're getting into cracks and stuff.
Okay.
Alpine climbing is usually at about a pitch like this, sometimes like this, if you're doing like an ice wall. But more often than not, in the Cascades, you're doing something at, not quite vertical, but I mean, if you slip, you're going to probably die. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And so you
Yeah.
have to be
Okay.
really careful. And you're wearing crampons, which are those spiky things you strap onto your
Yes.
boots
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah. Just was this magnificent adventure for me. But my older brother is real kind of quiet and kind of bookwormish and studious. He now calls it abusive because our folks didn't give us a choice. They said, hey, this is what you're going to do. But it was the 60s. What parents did give their kids a choice? Come on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm glad I understand more accurately what it's like.
Sorry.
Uh,
Yeah, it
no,
was
it's
a
important.
real
It's a
test.
picture.
Plus, it was extremely cold. The
Yeah.
third time I did it, I was 13 and I got pretty substantial frostbite on my fingers and toes. They were purple and kind of black and blue, at 13. But I just thought, yeah, I just thought I was a badass. I go and you can still see kind of the frostbite, and my buddies are like, well, that was a boring weekend. I'm like, why? And they're like, oh, all we had to do was a Scooby Doo marathon. What did you do, Dean? And I'm like, oh, I climbed Mount Hood, got some frostbite. They're like, what? So yeah,
Uh,
I felt for me it was just like this idyllic. I felt like I won the lottery with my folks. Yeah,
yeah. Um, so just bring it back a little
yeah,
bit to the grief part.
sure,
I wanted to talk about something you said in another podcast
yeah,
about how you started cold plunging
right.
before you started swimming, right?
No, well,
No,
I mean,
after you
before
started
I
swimming,
swam the
before
Willamette, yeah,
the river,
right.
right? And you experienced this relief from grief in the cold
Right.
plunge. And did you shiver a lot when you were in the cold plunge or no?
No. Uh,
No.
this was January 3rd of 2014. I never heard about Wim Hof till it was probably July when I was giving a speech on my Willamette swim. And somebody said, "Oh, have you heard of Wim Hof?" I literally thought it was a coffee maker. I'm like, "No, I don't drink coffee." They're like, "What?" And I'm like, "What?" Because it is Portland. So everybody wants to talk about their coffee makers. But there was no research out at that time that I was aware of. Nobody was cold plunging. Tom Seeger, who built Morosco Forge, and that's the world's first cold plunge company, he really didn't start that till 2018. So there weren't cold plunges. I just thought I knew that I was going to try to swim the Willamette River, and it was largely snow melt. And so I knew it'd probably be the first few days somewhere in the 40s, mid 40s to high 50s or low 50s. And so I knew it was going to be really, really cold, and I was still pretty sick. So I thought, I better take 6 months and acclimatize my body. That was the only reason I did it. It was just so unexpectedly, miraculously wonderful and a gift. I had no idea it boosts your immune system. I had no idea that it floods your brain with serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, norepinephrine, all those feel good drugs and chemicals that the body makes. But I was just trying to slowly prepare my body. And the research shows that you need water cold enough to make you gasp and 90 seconds in. Intuitively, I hit that mark. I thought, okay, let's start at 2 minutes, and every day I'll try to add a minute because I'm going to spend all day in this water. And so I got in for 2 minutes. It was January 3rd. Our water reservoir comes from the mountains. So it was probably high 40s, low 50s, which to now would feel like a hot tub to me. But at the time, it was cold. I didn't even put any ice in, stayed in for 2 minutes, and I got out. This is 3 years after Mary had died, and I'd been in this haze for 3 years, just really stuck, really feeling sorry for myself, not being able to move in the right direction at all. And I felt pretty wonderful. And I thought, what's happened? And then all of a sudden, I realized this 5,000 pounds in my chest isn't there. And it was such a sudden awareness that I even looked down at my chest like, what happened? And my therapist's brain just started whirring. I was like, okay, I didn't journal. I didn't go to a group. I didn't go to therapy. I didn't read anything from Vessel van der Kolk or anybody else. I didn't. I didn't do anything that the therapy stuff says I should do. I didn't meditate. But yet this is gone. It couldn't have been that easy. That it was just a neurological knee-jerk reaction to the cold water. Certainly that couldn't be it. And so I thought, okay, let's do a clinical trial. Let's wait. Let's wait till this goes. Hopefully it won't, but if it does, I imagine it will. I'll get right back in, same amount of time, same temperature of water, see if I have the same result. And about 3 hours later, I felt that 5,000 pounds again. So I got immediately back in for 2 minutes. Same thing happened. And that's when everything changed for me. That was the beginning of what I've developed called bio-wild psychology that is mostly biology based and nature connection based. because I now have come to know, based on all the work on the nervous system, not what you hear on Instagram. Everybody's talking about the nervous system as if it's anxiety or stress. They just don't know. I
Yeah.
I saw one sweet little girl, probably late teens, early 20s. She's like, I'm doing nervous system regulation with my friends. Cheers. And I'm like, having a drink with your friends is not nervous system regulation, honey, but you do you. But anyway, uh, it's where I realized so much of what I'd been taught about the nervous system and even about healing anxiety, depression, trauma, all the things that I'd specialized in, even grief, can have a real supplemental assistance with connecting with nature biologically. There's a biological route that's not required, that doesn't require any kind of prescription other than nature.
I
Yeah.
I found it interesting because, I had the very same experience.
Really?
I've been a cold bath person for a while, and I noticed that being in the cold bath was a really good way to process grief. But for me, I actually started shivering only after the loss
Mm.
because I didn't do super cold temperatures probably for the first year and a bit. And even then, I didn't really shiver. Even at, like, I'm in Canada, so it gets pretty cold here, and I have a non temperature regulated tub, which means in the winter, it'll go to half a degree Celsius. And I would stay in there for, like, the first year, it was like 7 to 10 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Now I've done as much as 28 minutes. But I felt such a significant relief from the grief, just the ability to process, but also extreme shivering, which I hadn't experienced at same time, same temperatures prior to the loss.
Hmm.
So most
Interesting.
people don't, you talk about it a lot, but I think almost nobody does, where emotional issues or issues that we attribute as nervous system solely on the mental and emotional
Right.
side
Right.
have such a big biological solution, source,
Right.
whatever the right word is.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like I call it that nature can lend you her happiness
Hmm. I
while
love
you
that.
figure it out.
That's nice.
Because, even the cold or all the things you talked about, serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, you get that high. I mean, I know I get a crazy high after being in the
Oh,
cold.
yeah, me too.
And even the
Hmm.
sun gets you this high. Watching
Hmm.
the sunrise, which I do pretty much every day, you get this high when you're done, this like awake, expanding of, and to what you said about nervous system work and how people phrase it, I think that most people don't realize that things like cell danger response that everybody's talking about from an emotional side are physically able to be triggered and de-triggered by hard environmental, non-subjective factors in your life
Oh,
that we now
absolutely.
have research on this.
Right. And that
So it's
research is all proving that we are much more like our cell phones than we'd like to admit. I don't know anyone that doesn't plug their cell phone in every night. Why? Because they want it to work efficiently the next day and they plan to use it a lot. And yet we never plug ourselves into the planet. So we're always on this low, almost dead charge because we are bioelectric, bioenergetic beings. We have to charge up our batteries. And if we don't, things start to slide and kathunk and get wonky. And because of that, then we develop anxiety. We have a harder time with grief. We have depressive episodes. We have burnout. Um, but let's go back because you're the first person, and I talk to a lot of people. So thank you for this. You've given me a gift. You're the first person I've ever talked to that had a before and after with the grief, with cold plunging. You never shivered, but then once you had this grief experience, you did. And, that first time, I really don't remember shivering. But even though I've done it every day with, a few, if I'm flying someplace, maybe I don't get my cold plunge in, but I've done it every day for the last 12 and a half years, which kind of beats everybody to the punch. Um, I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
I'm kind of the old guy that's been doing it forever, and still to this day. Well, this morning I went out and got my morning swim in at 6 o'clock, and the river is a snowmelt river, but we've had a lot of rain here this week, and I always know that if it rains for a couple days, the river a day later is going to be probably 5 to 10 degrees colder because it will melt that snow, and that snow will come down then. And I got
Mm.
in, and I usually swim for 30 minutes to an hour. Usually it's high 40s, low 50s. Today it was probably high 40s, but I didn't wear a wetsuit. And man, after about 30 minutes, I'm like, man, I better get back. And what I do is I swim half a mile to a mile down current. I call it the training of truth because it's so clear you can see all the pebbles and rocks on the bottom. And I get about 10 to 12 feet per stroke going down current. Turn around, I get a couple inches. And your brain just starts screaming, you're never going to make it back. But boy, today it really was screaming. And I think it's interesting that I'm sure you know the mammalian response of shivering or shuddering after an animal has been chased and they narrowly escape with their lives. They involuntarily shudder for about 5 to 10 minutes, and that's their nervous system regulating. Tom Seeger, the guy I've already quoted, we become pretty good friends. And he was ranting just a few months ago when we were together about how he was asking me how much I still shudder. And I'm like, oh, just about every day. And he's like, well, you know what that says? And I'm like, that I'm human? And he's like, no, he's like, you're either still processing trauma and grief, or you're probably being Dean and doing too much and have too much stress. And today, even though it was very cold, I shuddered violently all the way home. This week's been extremely stressful. I've had two clients that were suicidal that I've kind of been juggling, and I've been doing all sorts of other stuff. And so now when I shiver, I just kind of laugh and think, how stressed have I been? Isn't it nice that this is helping get my nervous system to a safe, charged up enough level to offshoot and offload all this stress in a healthy way? Yeah, so I think it's really brilliant that you've already tied that connection, but I think it's very, very valuable that you had a before and after experience with cold plunging. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had actually Thomas Steger. It was my
Oh,
first
did
guest
you?
on my
Okay,
podcast.
nice. So Tom.
Yeah,
I love the
yeah,
way
yeah,
his
I was
mind
there.
works. And he was probably, well, Emmanuela.
No, he was like, "Real Emmanuela, don't you think you do a little too much cold?"
I think you're probably in a little too long. I love his voice. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it's true. But, it's fun, and I just feel great
Oh,
afterwards.
yeah.
So I'm like, no harm, no foul. But we talked about that a little bit as well
Oh,
when I
did
was
you?
talking to him
Okay.
about shivering.
Perfect.
But I don't remember where I read it. But
Hmm.
I read somewhere about, I think it was someone in the army who dealt with a lot of soldiers who had PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And he had an accident of some kind. I'm slightly fuzzy on the details, but this part I'm clear on, where he ended up underneath a car. And when he was rescued, he couldn't stop shivering.
Hmm.
And I don't know if this was a book. I don't remember. I read it somewhere. And he said he remembered thinking to himself when he wrote about it, thank God I'm shivering, because he believed that meant that he wouldn't have PTSD from the
Hmm.
incident, which I found intriguing. it had never occurred to me until, or literally the day that, on his last day was the day I started shivering.
Wow.
I was there outside in the snow for like 5 or 6 hours, and I couldn't stop shivering.
Yeah.
And it's not like I hadn't, I'd always spend time outside dressed the same way. Like it's not just, and even since then, sometimes there'll just be random reason and I won't even be cold, but I'll just start to
Right.
shiver.
Right.
So it's been an interest of mine for sure because I
Interesting.
find it so intriguing.
Yeah, it was one of the things that made the swim the hardest because it was 42 to 45 degrees for the first 16 days because we'd had a lot of snow that year. And it was, even with the 3 mil triathlon wetsuit, I'd have to get out about every 45 minutes and I would just shiver violently. When I talk to people about that swim, I tell them it turned me from a no person into a yes person. Because when you're shivering that violently, you can't do this. They ask you anything and you're like, yeah. And I needed to turn into a more of a yes man. So yeah, but I just shivered and shook for 22 days. And that plus the flow of the river and learning to be a part of that, something bigger and more powerful than me, as well as the biological significance of constant grounding. And I don't know if you've heard of Gerald Pollock.
Yep.
Yeah. He lives here on the West Coast. We met at
Oh,
a
no way.
conference. And so he invited me to come up and go out to dinner with him. And I thought it was a huge honor. I found out pretty quickly the reason he did wasn't because I'm a nice guy. He had just written a paper on how fourth phase water cures cancer. And the first question he asked me is, Dean, is that a snowmelt river? Because his theory is most fourth phase water comes from glacial waters. And mine did. And I said, yeah. And so we had 4 or 5 hours together and he invited me back to his home for coffee and we sat there and talked for, it was, I call him the Einstein of water. It was just so much fun to hear how this brilliant man's brain works. But he thought too that the fourth phase water, that water talked to my water and helped calibrate it as well. So,
And you were, being that it's a snow melt, right?
right,
I hear that recently, but I haven't read his recent papers, that he's studying the fourth phase of water connection between deuterium.
right,
So a snow melt river would have been a deuterium depleted river, likely,
right,
which, we know has its own benefits
right,
as well.
right.
So,
Yeah. And then
yeah.
there's the theory of the blue mind from Wallace J. Nichols about, when you're in, on, around, by, or underwater, within 2 minutes, the brain goes to a rest state. And they're now using surfing, kayaking, fly fishing with combat veterans and finding it extremely helpful. And, that was one of the benefits my family saw that I wasn't particularly aware of when, I was still
Um,
in such terrible grief when I got in the river on June 3rd of 2014 that I couldn't say Mary's name without crying. And when I got out, June 27th, because we took a day off for 3 days, well, 2 days off, once because I got less than 3% body fat, and I had to do a big gala event for the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. But when we got out, we had this big celebration dinner inviting everybody on the team to come and just have fun. And I was telling funny stories about Mary because she was hilarious. And most of them had known her. And so we were just having the celebration, and my family just started looking weird at me. And finally, my brother in law was like, Dean, what's wrong with you? And I'm like, I don't know. You tell me. And he's like, you're talking about Mary. And I'm like, yeah, she was my wife for 30 years. And he's like, no, you haven't been able to talk to about her since she died. You you're not even able to let anybody else talk about her. And you're talking about her and you're not bawling your eyes out. I'm like, oh, I hadn't noticed. And that's what I love about using the power of nature It's so organic, and we're so hardwired for nature that we don't even notice. My clients hardly even notice what's happening, but everybody around them notices the
Yeah.
change. Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like you got like an intensive, right?
Yeah.
All that time
Yeah.
that you were in the river, the moving water, the cold, the being in nature,
The
like all of it. It was
sunlight,
like,
the fractals, everything.
yeah,
I mean, I'm so glad that had been a lifelong dream. It was the perfect place, the perfect environment to put my mind and body. And that wasn't even why I did it. That was people all the time on Instagram. Well, how did you know that would heal your cancer? I'm like, as a matter of fact, not only did I not know, we thought it was probably going to kill me. We had all sorts of
yeah.
plans for the week after. I was going to fly down to University of California, San Diego to their oncology ward because we thought I'd need all sorts of assistance, but that didn't happen.
Yeah. And that's why I phrase it at the beginning. I feel like it's the hand of God, right? Just,
Yeah.
no part of you was like, I'm going to do this. It's going to help me because of this, this, and that. No, you just did it and it just
I
happened.
didn't want to die on a couch. You know, my
Yeah.
daughter was 21. She'd seen her mama die, and thankfully we were able to keep her home, but mostly on the couch. And it was it was quiet, it was peaceful, but she was so full of life and she went out with a whimper. And if I'm going to die, I don't want to die with a whimper. I don't want to die watching Wheel of Fortune. You know, I wanted to,
I love that part when
yeah,
you said that in the book and you're like, I just didn't want to die on the couch. I'm like, that's good because I feel like our society today is all about the extension of life,
right,
but on the bed and on the
right.
couch. Like, I'd rather live shorter. I talk about the indigenous people's lifespans sometimes, and a lot of comments that I get in that regard are like, well, the Inuit died young. Yeah, catching eggs off a cliff. I'm cool with that, like in
or,
front of a polar bear.
measles from the white man.
Yeah, like all of these reasons for death are, I think, better, in my
Yeah.
opinion, than just being pumped up with stuff in a hospital bed or on a couch at home.
And this has led me to a real way of looking at life and health recovery, cancer or any other kind of chronic illness. We in our Western mindset have what I call the recipe approach. Okay, the way I'm going to get well is I'm going to take this and this and this, and I've got to sequence it perfectly and have the right amount and look for some kind of magical cocktail to ingest, and then magically everything will go away. And I don't believe that's how life works or how it's meant to work. You know, to me, the recipe approach is such a disconnection from this world, this living planet that we're supposed to be highly connected to, that it's almost obscene. It's what I call synthetic living syndrome. We've been so disconnected now for 2, 3 generations from Earth that we think being connected to it is either recreation or just plain weird or a waste of time, when
Or
it's
radical.
really what our body, minds, and I believe even our spirits require. So I believe in what I call the relationship approach. Relationship is okay, what do I need to change? What am I holding on to in my body and mind and spirit that's causing this toxicity? What am I doing? How am I relating to the world, to others, to myself that's causing this imbalance? I work with, as you might imagine, a lot of cancer patients and a lot of chronically ill, and the saddest thing that I see is those that are chasing the cure with this recipe
Or,
approach. I had one lady who was a doctor herself, going to 3 different doctors and taking 133 supplements a day. I'm like, you're a doctor. You know about clinical trials. Even if you get better, you don't know what made you get better. And I told her, if you're going to work with me, you got to cut 90% of those supplements down, pare it down to less than 15 so that you know what you're taking even. And I encouraged her to fire even me if she had to, so that because what I see with most cancer patients, after they recover and become survivors, it's still outside of them. They don't really know what made them well. So they give credit to the doctor or to the chemo or to a certain supplement or something, but they make no interior change with themselves, with Earth, with everyone around them, and it comes back. Or even if it doesn't come back, they're terrified every day that it's going to. I was fortunate enough to celebrate 10 years now, cancer-free, this March. And I realized, oh, yeah, that's a big deal. And I'm really thankful, but I don't worry about it every day because I know exactly what healed me. And I've continued to kind of double down on those things. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's always something, and this is actually one of the, things about this whole title for my podcast, right? It's that you always think that it's something outside of you
Right.
that must tell you what to do, that it must be a supplement because you must introduce a physical object of sorts into your body to get better.
Right.
It can't be that your body has an internal healing mechanism that you just have to plug into. It has to be somebody, something, or even life and death and birth, right? It's the birth of a child. Oh, well, we need an expert. Let's bring in the doctor. Or the death. Well, I can't possibly decide what's going to happen with this person or animal. I must call the vet. I must call the doctor. I must go to the hospital. And that's the point in which I decided to start my podcast. I was visiting the last spot of my horse because I didn't call anybody. We just spent the last day together. And watching someone else's horse on their last day being treated, drugged by the veterinarian, instead of, them potentially saying, hey, horse, whatever the horse's name was, or if it's a person, hey, so-and-so, what do you want? Is
Right.
this your last day or not? So I think that's really important because then it's like you said, you can die on the couch and you can die in like a whimper or with a total loss of dignity, or you can have it at the end. And most of us, I believe, take it away from either newborn babies or older people because it's a selfish reason. We don't want to let go.
Yeah, and we're
Even if they're
scared,
ready.
and as I've been listening to you, the thought came, the more we're suffering from synthetic living syndrome, totally disconnected from all things natural, we're going to be more disconnected from life, which then makes us more disconnected from death. The more disconnected from things you are, the more scary they seem. I get hundreds of comments and DMs every day. What about ticks? What about bears? What about this? What about that? And I'm like, yeah, they're out there. If it happens, it happens. But you just, when you're not familiar with something, it's much scarier. And when you watch silly things on TV that only show you the worst thing that could possibly happen, then your mind thinks it happens all the time. But since we're
And
so disconnected from life, then of course the death process is going to be much scarier, and we want to push it out of sight and have somebody kind of clean it up for us. Yeah, that's a really good thought. Thank you for that.
I actually like that too, that you said in, I don't remember where you said it actually. You said if you ask your mind a question, it has to answer.
Right. That's
I thought
a
that was,
superpower that most of us don't know. All of us have had that experience. You can't remember somebody's name, or you're watching a silly game show or playing a board game and trivia, and you can't really remember. And and then an hour later or something, you're brushing your teeth and it pops into your head. When you ask a question, the brain, by its very nature, they found this out with neurological science or neuroscience, that the brain, by its very nature, has to answer every question you ask. Well, if you do the math on it, it's not just trivial questions. It can be the deepest questions of your life. And so ever since I found that research out in the early 2000s, I have clients use that for their own good, even for their own life purpose. And what you do is you approach it the same way you do a trivial question. What was that person's name? And you really concentrate on it, and then you let it go.
You were talking about
Mm-hmm.
how people get diagnosed with cancer
Mm-hmm.
and they're afraid, or they're afraid of ticks and this and that, of things
Right.
that they don't know.
Right.
And I think that's an ingrained, taught belief. Whereas if you think of, if we were hunter-gatherers way back then, if we were afraid of the unknown, we wouldn't survive.
Right.
We wouldn't be able to live without being comfortable with the unknown.
Right.
Whereas today, everything is made known and you are raised to fear the unknown.
Right. Whether you know it or not, because we have disconnected so much from nature and her ways that the lights are always the same and under our control. The temperature is always under our control. Nothing ever, unless we live in a real chaotic house, nothing in our environment ever moves. So it's constantly the same. People ask me all the time, because they know with my lymphoma story, I started doing forest bathing to handle my lymphoma, and I started going out for 24 hours once a week. I don't do 24 hours now. I do about 8 or 9, but every Friday I still go out, and people say, "Do you go to the same place every week?" And I say, "Yeah, pretty much." It's so much fun to see this place that I've been going for 10 years change, and the river change its banks a bit. Things grow, things die, trees fall. It's wonderful to have sameness, but at the same time see the process of life. And when I go into the forest, I know, even though I've been there hundreds of times over 10 years, it's never the same. Never the same.
Yeah.
And so I'm building that muscle that modern civilization kind of handicapped or weakened.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that's so important mentally and emotionally for being connected to nature that we lose when we're so disconnected. We become fearful of anything unknown in our lives. Well, guess what? Just about, even if you try to hyper control your environment, things are still going to come up that you could not have predicted. Yeah.
Yeah. And your ability to deal with change dictates your resilience as a human being.
Right.
And I believe we cripple our children with this whole emphasis on routine. Like, as a mom of 2 young kids, especially at the beginning, I can't tell you how many parents would be like, "Your kids need routine. They need routine." And my response was, "Screw routine. I don't like it."
Yeah. Good for you.
I mean, now people don't say, I don't really hang out with moms that much anymore, because apparently I'm too different. But, but I've always been a big believer of that if your routine is that a routine, then you kill your resilience.
Right. And we baby our children now. My daughter and I were just laughing this last week. She came to visit, and we went up into the Columbia River Gorge and hiking, and she was filming me do crazy things. And we went by the very first lake they let me swim across. And I was 8 years old, and it was about a quarter of a mile to half a mile across. And she's like, "I can't believe they didn't at least kayak with you or swim with you." They're just like, "Yeah, go." And I said, well, on their behalf, Dad said, "What if you got out in the middle and you get too tired to swim?" And I looked at him like he was crazy, and I said, "I'll just roll over on my back and float a while." And he's like, "Okay, go." And they said, "Well, did they watch you the whole time?" I said, "No." When I came back into the picnic, I'm like, "Hey, I'm done." And they're like, "Oh, Oh, yeah, okay. Almost like they'd for parents in the 60s. But it developed a quiet confidence in me that now, I mean, a poor little 8-year-old would have to have water wings and 3 flotational devices and 4 kayaks around him if they even let him do it, you know? So,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
The water's too cold, you're gonna
Yeah.
die. People don't realize how hard it is to die of
Yeah,
hypothermia.
yeah. There were
Look at your
times
stories.
swimming the Willamette, I thought maybe I would. You know, we had to get me out about every 45 minutes because I could I could feel my body going into thrombosis and I could feel my internal organs banging against my rib cage. But even that, you just get out, you run in place, you warm up, you get back. It's everybody's like, oh, hypothermia. More people die of heat stroke, and nobody seems to be scared of the
That's right.
heat. So I don't know why cold has
Yeah.
be. I think it must have been our great or great great grandparents that had been cold all their lives that just prized warmth that I don't know where we became
Well,
so
because it was
cold
so
avoidant.
rare.
Yeah.
It was so rare warmth
Yeah.
in a cold environment. And now that it's easily accessible, everyone's like, oh, you got to warm up, warm up. Meanwhile, you're killing all your kids'
Right.
brown fat,
Right.
right? Like my first daughter, I didn't really, I was too overwhelmed. I didn't pay attention. I didn't know any of this. And I let my mother-in-law overdress her.
Oh.
And she lost her ability to regulate in the cold so fast. My second one, I would go hunting with her on my back, and all she wore was a thin wool suit. And
Wow.
I would end after 3 hours, her whole body freezing cold. She's happy as a
Yeah.
clam.
Yeah.
She has no problem to this day, you know? She's all cool with the cold because I just built on those
Yeah.
instead of killing them.
Wow. Good for you.
But we need to learn more from older parents, older generations of letting go when
Right.
it comes to kids
Right.
and even animals. Like, watch a
Right.
new duck mom. The little baby ducks are like going crazy here, and she's just like, "Dee, dee, 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 dee," you know,
Yeah.
she's not like, oh my God.
Well, and you've probably seen on Instagram, it's one of my favorites. I see it every winter, how in Denmark or Holland, all the Northern European countries, I think it's actually Denmark though, they actually on Wednesdays have the parents bring rain gear and the kids go out and an extra change of clothes. And for recess that day, for about 30 minutes to an hour, they have them go out and play in the mud and just get really wet and really muddy. And they think it's really important for them in their development. I think it's just brilliant.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, all of those things. It all ties back to this whole being disconnected from, or even calling the idea of going in a cold river, you know, watching the sunrise, getting sunshine as radical
Yeah.
because we're so far disconnected from what we would have been
Right.
really as humans.
Right. I love a
And I
lot of
want to,
biohackers, but I hate that name and I hate that approach
oh, yes.
because it's back to that recipe. Well, if you just do this and this and this, no, just be a wild human the way you were designed to be. You know, people all the time, they'll see me grounding, hugging a tree, but I'll have my hiking boots on and they're like, you're doing it wrong. I'm like, I'm hugging a 100-foot, 20-foot diameter antenna. I said, you go with your shoes on. I don't usually say this, but sometimes if they get really snarky, I do. I said, if you grab an electric fence with your hiking boots on, are you still going to get shocked? And they're like, ah. You know, I'm grabbing something much, much bigger than that. We make these silly little rules in our head that nature just doesn't follow. We have all these tiny little protocols, mostly based on our lack of awareness and lack of experience. A lot of these people, I often wonder, you know, when they tell me these things, I want to say, yeah, have you ever gone and done it yourself, or is this just because you're on Instagram constantly watching this? I wonder because to me it shows a lack of experience.
And most people, the devil's in the details is what I like to say when it comes to these things. And people forget these details, like you ground through your sweat glands. So armpits, hands, it's not just your feet.
Right.
You can ground with your hands.
And I think the reason I'm a bit adverse to it
We're like at
is,
this perfect.
what's that?
I said we tend to have this idea of what perfect looks like.
Yeah. And there is no perfect in nature, and that's what makes it perfect. I think the reason I'm a bit adverse to that type of thinking is when I swam the Willamette, I didn't know anything about grounding or quantum biology or cold, and yet it still was willing to meet me where I was at and heal me anyway, even though I didn't know even what I was stepping into. And so I think we have to know what nature is doing in order for it to do anything good for us. And that's simply not true. All we have to do is connect.
Yeah. And you can get away with so much,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Yeah, sure. There are some people that are sensitive to certain things. Maybe they need to get more right than the other person. But I wanted to ask you about your cold baths
Hmm.
today. Do you
Hmm.
still stay in there for just a few minutes or do you stay in there for longer?
Yeah. I just three
Since
to
you
four
keep
minutes,
swimming over your
5 minutes maybe.
forever.
Yeah. Uh,
Okay.
I've got a Morosco forge, and for 6 years, I kept it only at about 41, 42, which for most people would, most serious cold plungers, that would be way too warm. For me, it gave me that shock. I felt great afterwards. I found what I call my body's sweet spot. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, it just wasn't giving me that full body blast. And so I started incrementally going lower. And now it's probably at about 34 to 36. But I still only stay in about 3, 4, 5 minutes. And I don't like to watch time because then I don't get a connection. And so I'll
Mm.
just put on a song from the 70s. All the songs back then were 3 to 5 minutes. And so when the song's over, I'm done. And I treat
Oh,
it very differently than most, mostly because I think I'm a swimmer. And I really got used to the cold swimming in the Willamette. And, Wim Hof has, and most cold plunge protocols are kind of breathe and then be tough. The two steps: breathe, be tough. Me, I have three, and you can see how organically they came into my life based on me having to swim this river. It's the first one is stay loose, because if I tightened up like a lot of these guys I see, or even tried to be tougher than the river, I'd have never been able to swim 10, 12 miles a day. You can't swim tight. You got to stay loose. So the first one is I would kind of orient myself, watch the river for a while, see where it was going as I was getting back in, and I'd say, stay loose. Then I'd get in, and it was such a blast, especially when you are face down in it, and you could feel your face start to swell. I would say, love the awakening, because cold really, if you notice and you're not just full of fear, it really wakens you up, and not just physically, but mentally, and I believe even emotionally and spiritually. It just really wakens you up. And so that's what I say then is love the awakening. And then I would always say, let the river lead. And now I just say, let the cold lead, especially if it's in my plunge tank. And so
yeah.
I've found, and I was talking to a brilliant lady doctor the other day, and she's like, oh, you know what you've done? And I said, as usual, probably not. And she said, you've taken, Wim is the masculine approach. You've taken the feminine approach. And I said, oh, yeah, I think you're right. Can I still have my man card? but, but it is a much more intuitive, much more flowing, almost spiritual approach that was based just on me being very deeply connected to that river in the process of swimming it.
Yeah, I mean, what I usually say is go warmer and stay longer because, I
Yeah.
mean, you're getting lots of cold swimming time, but I'm sure like you said earlier in the podcast, where at some point you actually hit that restful, peaceful state in the cold water.
Oh yeah.
And the same thing happens in a cold bath if you stay in there for long enough. The problem is most people are in and out and they don't wait long enough for their bodies to hit that uh, extreme calmness
Right.
that because I do long times, whether it's really cold or warmer, I will stay in there for a long time because I like that really calm feeling and the clarity. Like I get so much reading done in the cold bath, research, all that because your brain's like sharper.
Right. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I tell everybody stay in till you feel the whoosh. I'll be in and all of a sudden it'll just be, I just feel like my whole body is flooded. I swear even my eyesight gets clearer. And
Yeah.
that extreme sense of calm, like you're talking about. And I think the reason I don't stay in longer in my tank is because it is colder. But also, like you said, I'm swimming just about every day, like I did this morning, and I'll get 30 minutes to an hour in not as cold a water. Yeah, and
Yeah.
so it
Let's
gives me
go.
that clarity there. If I wasn't doing it like you, I'd probably stay longer in warmer water. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Now, when I have guests on, most of the time I ask them, and in your case, I feel like this is obvious, but I'm going to pose the question, try to pose
sure.
a little differently.
Yeah.
Is, your journey through grief, through healing with the river, through healing with the forest, obviously your perspective on death was already different, but how has that accentuated your ability to consider yourself the ultimate authority when faced with life and death?
Oh, ultimate authority. I would never consider myself that. I have learned more than the dean prior to my wife's death. And
Well, authority of yourself, right? Not authority as
oh,
in to teach
okay,
others,
okay.
but authority that you hold the cards in deciding
Hmm.
in the face of your, life or death situation. It's not somebody else that must tell you.
Right, right. I have come to believe because I've almost died 3 times. And by that I mean I've woken up in the hospital with a nurse or doctor there saying, "Oh, we thought you weren't going to make it. We called your family." And I've always felt a bit cheated because I never saw the light. I didn't get to talk to grandma or my wife who died. I just was out and back. And it peeled off that thin veneer of ignorance that we and avoidance that we have as a Western culture, that we've got an unlimited number of days and that we're never going to die. We don't like to think about it, and so we don't. And for most of us, it's almost a trauma if we experience somebody else close to us dying, as it was me. Um, and so it's really changed the way I look at life. I don't look at it as an unlimited number of days. I look at it as a constant streaming gift. My friends think it's morbid, so I don't talk about it a lot. But one of the first things I do is when I wake up, I look at the date and I try to think of all the other days of that date that I've had in the past. How many Junes have I experienced in my life? What were those Junes like? And
Mm.
I imagine this is the last June I'll ever get. And so, if this is the last June I'm ever going to experience, how do I want to spend this day? And so it's cliche to spend, everybody says, oh, live today as if it's your last. Okay, what does that even mean? Most people say that, but don't really think about it or live it or concentrate on it because it's too scary to them. To me, it just keeps me sharp and on the edge of remembering that I'm very mortal. And I think the best way to approach death is to have a good offense. Live your life so well that you don't have that many regrets or that many things left unsaid or undone. And then when you do die, realize none of us are ever going to have enough time. And none of us really know what's on the other side. If anybody tells you they know, be suspicious because they haven't been there. So we really don't know. And so approach it with curiosity and openness. And that's one of the things I feel like I've learned most from a deepening connection and relationship with nature is I'm constantly curious. And I've been in some real pickles where I had to think my way out. But that's part of becoming resilient and learning how to be more flexible in life. And that's the sad thing that we've lost in our current mode of living. So death for me, the authority in myself is to remember that I am going to die, so I really need to live.
I like that.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, it works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm writing a new book. The working title is The Wild Return. But AI told me I should use a phrase that my sister said 2 years ago. She's got real snarky with me. I was really bugging her. I can't remember why. I think it was because she was really upset about something and I was having a hard time getting there because it seemed fairly trivial to me. And she's like, you know what I hate about you now? And I said, no, but I'm pretty sure you're going to tell me. And she's like, you're just annoyingly happy all the time. I said, well, I'm going to take that as a compliment. I said, and I'm not going to, normally when I annoy you, I apologize because sometimes I can be really annoying, but I'm not going to apologize for annoying you for being happy. You've seen what I've been through. And AI told me that should be the title of my book, Annoyingly Happy. So
I know. I like your idea better. Oh my God. Anyways, thank you so much for the conversation.
It's been a fun one. And you did your homework. It's been a very lively, very interesting, very different from the other 480 podcasts I've done. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. It's my attempt.
Yeah.
I like to know what I'm getting into and where I want to go.
Yeah, obviously.
Unique.
It shows. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thanks to the listeners as well for listening.
Exactly.